She was a Bavarian duchess who became the Empress of Austria and the Queen of Hungary. Known for her beauty, tragic life, and rebellious spirit, Empress Elisabeth, better known as Sisi, remains one of the most iconic royals in European history. But behind the fairy tale image was a woman plagued by sorrow, loneliness, and a deep yearning for freedom. This is the true story of Sisi. Elisabeth Amalie Eugenie was born on the 24th of December, 1837, in Munich, Bavaria. She was the fourth of 10 children born to Duke Maximilian Joseph and Princess Ludovica of Bavaria, herself the daughter of King Maximilian I of Bavaria. Though of noble birth, Sisi's childhood was surprisingly informal. Her father was eccentric and liberal, preferring the countryside to courtly duties. Sisi spent much of her youth in Possenhofen Castle on Lake Starnberg, where she grew up outdoors, riding horses and avoiding the rigid protocol of royal courts. But in 1853, everything changed. Elisabeth was just 15 when she traveled with her mother and older sister Helene to meet Emperor Franz Joseph I of Austria. Originally, it was Sisi's older sister, Helene, who was meant to marry Emperor Franz. The match was arranged by their mothers, Princess Ludovica and Archduchess Sophie, who were sisters and eager to unite their branches of the royal family. Helene, known for her piety and discipline, was considered the perfect imperial bride. But fate had other plans. Franz Joseph was instantly drawn not to Helene, but to Sisi, captivated by her beauty, grace, and natural charm. Against his mother's wishes and all prior arrangements, he declared, "I will marry Elisabeth, or no one," in a stunning and very public decision. There's no clear evidence that Sisi knew beforehand of his decision. In fact, most accounts suggest she was caught completely off guard. Shy, emotionally unprepared, and still a teenager, she had little choice but to accept. Her reaction was said to be one of quiet distress rather than joy. Helene, humiliated and heartbroken, reportedly cried for days. Ludovica, though surprised, quickly pivoted to support the new match, seeing her younger daughter elevated to empress. To make matters more intimate, Franz Joseph and Elisabeth were first cousins. Their mothers were sisters, both daughters of King Maximilian I, Joseph of Bavaria. On the 24th of April, 1854, at just 16 years old, Elisabeth was married in Vienna and became Empress of Austria. It was a grand imperial wedding, but behind the glittering facade, Sisi was unprepared for life in the rigid and conservative Habsburg court. Sisi and her sister Helene were very close as children, growing up side by side in a warm and informal Bavarian household. However, after the wedding, their relationship grew distant. Though Helene accepted the outcome with grace and never showed signs of resentment, their close bond was never the same. The fairy tale wedding was over. At just 16, Elisabeth stepped into the vast gilded world of the Viennese court and immediately felt trapped. In the early days of her marriage, Sisi was deeply lonely. The Austrian court was cold, ceremonial, and dominated by rules she neither understood nor cared for. She later wrote that she had exchanged her freedom for a cage. Despite being adored by the public for her beauty and youth, she felt invisible within the Hofburg Palace. Her husband, Franz Joseph, remained genuinely fond of her. He was formal, disciplined, and used to duty, traits Elisabeth admired but struggled to relate to. Their early marriage was marked by affection, but also by misunderstanding. He could not fully grasp the emotional turmoil his young wife endured. Adding to her distress was the ever-watchful eye of her mother-in-law, Archduchess Sophie. Sophie viewed Sisi as immature and unsuitable for court life and took control of everything, from palace protocol to the upbringing of Sisi's children. In letters, Sophie even referred to Sisi as a silly young girl. Meanwhile, the political atmosphere within the empire was tense. Although the 1848 revolutions had been suppressed, the Habsburg monarchy was still navigating a fragile peace. Austria's imperial dominance was slipping. In 1859, Austria suffered a devastating defeat to France and Sardinia in the Second Italian War of Independence. The loss of Lombardy was a blow to the empire's prestige and to Franz Joseph's rule. Sisi, with no political power and little control over her personal life, began to retreat inward. She became obsessed with her appearance and health, developing strict beauty and diet regimes. By 1857, Sisi's mental and emotional struggles were becoming more apparent. She was often unwell and increasingly withdrawn. Feeling trapped, she began to escape whenever she could. She retreated to her family's estate in Bavaria, finding solace in the company of her mother and sisters. These trips became a lifeline for her, a brief escape from the confines of the Viennese court, where she felt stifled by its formality and the constant demands of her role as empress. Austria's military weakness was further exposed in 1866, when it was humiliated by Prussia in the Austro-Prussian War, ending its role as leader of the German states. While the imperial court in Vienna continued to weigh heavily on her, Elizabeth found an unexpected source of freedom and strength in Hungary. Her relationship with the Hungarian nobility began to deepen after her repeated visits to her estates in the country, which became a refuge from the rigidity and isolation of the Hofburg Palace. Sisi's growing fondness for Hungary wasn't just about escaping the stifling court life, but a way to cope with the emotional weight of her position. Sisi became obsessed with maintaining a youthful appearance, famous for her long, flowing hair and slender figure, believing that her beauty was her only source of power and identity. It was almost as if, by controlling her image, she could regain some of the agency that she felt had been stripped away by her royal life. The Austrian Empire struggled to maintain control over its vast, multi-ethnic lands. Hungary, in particular, had become a hotbed of nationalist movements, with the Hungarian nobility seeking greater autonomy from Vienna. Franz Joseph had to deal with rising tensions and, eventually, the Austro-Hungarian Compromise of 1867 granted full autonomy to Hungary, and the Habsburg Empire officially became the Austro-Hungarian Empire, splitting the empire into two equal parts. Hungary was where Sisi felt most at ease. There, she was not just an empress, she was Elizabeth, the woman with her own identity, free from the suffocating expectations of Vienna's court. She learned the language, embraced Hungarian culture, and became a symbol of the unity between Austria and Hungary. She was crowned Queen of Hungary in Budapest alongside Franz Joseph, a rare moment of triumph in a life marked by turbulence. In the mid-1860s, Elizabeth's emotional health began to deteriorate sharply. She had always been a sensitive and deeply introspective person, but the pressures of being empress, compounded by the intrusion of court politics, took their toll. She struggled with depression, anxiety, and nervous breakdowns, which were poorly understood at the time. Sisi's personal life continued to unravel. Her children, Gisela, Rudolf, and Marie Valerie, were raised by others or kept at a distance. Only her youngest, Valerie, born in 1868, had a close relationship with her. Her son, Crown Prince Rudolf, was intelligent, liberal, and alienated from his father. In 1889, Rudolf and his lover, Baroness Mary Vetsera, were found dead in a murder-suicide at the Merling hunting lodge. The scandal rocked the empire. Sisi was shattered. She never recovered from Rudolf's death and wore black for the rest of her life. Haunted by grief, Sisi withdrew entirely from public duties. She avoided Vienna, traveled constantly, and sought anonymity. She rarely stayed in one place, writing poetry filled with melancholy and existential despair. As nationalism rose throughout the empire, especially among Slavs and Czechs, Sisi's retreat mirrored the monarchy's own isolation. Despite the overwhelming sorrow, Sisi's relationship with her husband, Franz Joseph, remained strained. Though he was devoted to his wife, he struggled to understand the depths of her grief. Their marriage, which had always been complicated, grew more distant with time. Elizabeth's focus on her own emotional and physical well-being, along with her growing isolation, made their connection even more fragile. In 1898, at the age of 60, Elizabeth was tragically murdered in Geneva, Switzerland. On the 10th of September, she was walking along the Lake Geneva promenade when an Italian anarchist named Luigi Luceni approached her. Luceni, who had previously attempted to kill several European royals, approached Sisi with a small, sharp file. Without warning, he struck her in the chest, stabbing her directly in the heart. Sisi continued walking for several moments after the attack, unaware that she had been fatally wounded. It wasn't until she collapsed in the hotel lobby that she was rushed to her room, where she died shortly thereafter. He had no personal vendetta against her, but, as an anarchist, targeted her as a symbol of monarchy and royal privilege. Originally, Luceni had planned to assassinate Prince Philip of Belgium, but when he could not find him, he decided to kill any royal. By coincidence, he was in Geneva on the same day that the Empress arrived for a visit. Luceni was arrested soon after the crime, and during his interrogation, he admitted that his assassination was politically motivated. He saw the monarchy, and by extension Empress Elisabeth, as symbols of an unjust and oppressive system, making her a target of his radical ideology. He was convicted of murder, and in 1899 he was sentenced to life imprisonment. His sentence was served in the Waldheim prison in Austria. He died in 1910 at the age of 36 from suicide. He hanged himself in his cell, and some reports suggested that he had been driven to despair by the notoriety of his crime, while others believed that his mental instability may have played a role in his tragic end. The news of Sisi's murder sent shockwaves throughout Europe. Despite her personal struggles and increasing absence from the court, she had remained a beloved figure, particularly in Austria and Hungary. Her tragic death was met with immense grief and sorrow. In Austria, people mourned the loss of their empress, who had represented beauty, grace, and a softer image of the monarchy. In Hungary, where she had long been adored as a protector of their national identity, the news was even more devastating. The Hungarians saw her as a symbol of unity, and her assassination felt like an attack on everything she had represented for them. Her funeral in Vienna was one of the grandest ever held for a member of the Habsburg family, with the entire empire in mourning. Franz Joseph, though emotionally distant in his marriage to Elizabeth, was deeply shaken by her death, as was the rest of the royal family. The Empress, who had once been so distant and detached, was now remembered as a tragic figure, her beauty and suffering immortalized by the public. Elizabeth's assassination marked the end of an era for the monarchy. It was a stark reminder of the growing political instability across Europe. Though she had distanced herself from the political struggles of the empire, her death became a symbol of the tensions between the monarchy and the rising forces of nationalism and radicalism. The loss of the People's Empress left an indelible mark on the Habsburg monarchy. Her death compounded the tragedy of their son Rudolf's suicide just a decade earlier. And by now, Franz Joseph was beginning to face the heavy burden of ruling over an empire in decline. While he publicly mourned his wife and wore the weight of their shared history, personally, he withdrew into himself. His emotional state became more withdrawn and detached from the affairs of state. Though he continued to lead the empire for another 16 years until his death in 1916, only 2 years before the empire's collapse after World War I. Today, Empress Elisabeth is a cultural icon in Austria and Hungary. Her life has inspired countless books, films, television series, and even a popular musical. She is remembered as a tragic beauty, a rebel empress, and a woman ahead of her time, haunted by fame and burdened by a crown she never truly wanted. Empress Sisi lived a life many would envy, but few would survive. She was more than a symbol of beauty. She was a woman navigating power, grief, and identity in a world that never truly let her be free. What do you think of Sisi? Despite being an empress, wandered restlessly through life in search of meaning, freedom, and self. Was she escaping a gilded cage, or was she chasing a version of herself that never truly existed?